Usually how I like to start these conversations is it's really about an individual's journey. And yours has been quite interesting. Kind of traveled around the map a little bit of the world. So I kind of want to start a little bit maybe of why you decided to join the Peace Corps. And I think then we can kind of go off on a bunch of different tangents. But let's start there of sort of why you joined the Peace Corps and then what were you doing for those couple of years while you were there?
Thank you, Grant. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. So I grew up in upstate New York outside of Syracuse, and that's where my dad's family was from. And my mom's family was from West Africa, from Ghana. So my parents met when my dad did the Peace Corps in the 70s.
Ah, nice.
And so I grew up in a family where, we're very international. We traveled a lot. And I always knew that I would one day want to do the Peace Corps because I kind of grew up in a Peace Corps house. And I got the brochure in high school. I was like, okay, after college, this is what I'm going to do. And I followed through with it.
So where'd you end up going? Where were you sort of stationed, quote unquote?
Yep. So after college, I was assigned to work at a community health center in Mali.
Okay.
A francophone country in West Africa. And my job was to support the community nurse and providing health services, mostly pre and postnatal care to women. So they would come in for checkups for their infants, for their toddlers, or if someone in their household was ill, they would come to the community health center to try to access health services. And this was my first time living in a rural environment in sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, I had the connection through my mother, but I had never actually lived in a community that had a lot of the challenges that I studied in college. So I majored in political science and international affairs and really wanted to focus on like global international development. And so I knew there were places that had issues with access to running water, issues with access to electricity, but to be in the community and see it firsthand and see some of those challenges, particularly facing women, that's kind of what changed my entire career trajectory in terms of what I wanted to do with my life.
And seeing it day to day too, some people can travel and go for maybe a week or something like that, but being day to day was it 2 years?
Yeah, it's 2 years. No, for sure. You're completely right. Seeing it day to day, but also having personal relationships with the individuals and like learning about their stories and seeing the love they had for their families and their communities, and also just seeing people working incredibly hard and not really getting to a standard of living that reflected that hard work, right? So every day you're getting up early, you're, going out collecting water, getting firewood, like coming to your community. You're working so hard, but there are issues around being able to pay for basic necessities. And so that really, for me, I felt compelled to ask myself, is there an alternative to this? Is there a better way, whether it's figuring out income generating activities, whether it's figuring out how to access more resources so people that could live at a higher standard? So that's kind of what started going through my mind. It was more of like a curiosity, like really wanting to understand why. And then from there, being able to identify potential solutions that could be community driven and community led, because I'm only there for 2 years. And I started researching income generating activities. I started spending a lot of time with the women's associations and sitting in on their meetings and just hearing their own ideas around some of the things that they were experiencing, and also being very aware that they wanted changes for themselves and for their community members. And then that's where I want to show you this. So this is the Shea seed.
Oh, wow. It's so tiny.
Yeah. People think it's a much bigger thing, but it's probably the size of like an almond.
Yeah, for sure.
And it grows on the fruit of the Shea tree. And this tree grows exclusively in sub-Saharan Africa, from East to West Africa. And women are the traditional harvesters. They're the producers. They're the ones going out, collecting this raw material, bringing it back into their communities, and extracting out the oil that's contained in the seed.
What do they use it for there? Do they do it to sell it locally? Do they do it for their own health and wellness? Like what is it sort of used for locally for the women?
Locally, it's kind of that product you use for everything. Gotcha. So you can eat the fruit. The fruit is edible, and then contained in the fruit is a nut. And the nut, it's kind of like in the middle, kind of like an avocado, but it's not. Okay. The skin of the fruit is not as thick as an avocado. And it's smaller than an avocado. And then inside of the nut is the seed. And in that seed is the oil. So women go through this traditional process that's handed down from mother to daughter, and they extract out the oil and use it primarily for cooking.
Okay.
So you know how like coconut oil has been a thing, you know,
totally.
especially like if you're paleo or keto or whatever. In the same way that you take coconut oil and kind of heat it up and can fry up your veggies or, you know, whatever it may be. Same thing with Shea.
Gotcha.
Shea is a solid. And so when you put it for cooking, you heat it up and then you can like saute things in it. You can make stews, sauces with it. So primarily it's a cooking oil. And it also makes sense why it's so closely tied to women, because in a lot of these traditional communities, women are the ones in the kitchen. They're the ones taking care of the household. So it's something that they use to feed their family, but it's also used for hair care. Also used for skin care. When a baby is born, it's the first thing they put on a baby after the baby has its first bath, because it's a really great moisturizer. It's a skin protector. So yeah, they use it for pretty much anything. If someone like twists an ankle, they rub shea butter all over it because it has anti-inflammatory properties. I mean, it's used for everything.
I think it's magic.
Yes, the magical properties of shea butter. Exactly.
But it sounds like you would have such a deep connection to like this fruit or product or whatever you want to call it. I'm sure, you know, something that does everything and you use every single day. It's probably like a pretty cool connection, piece of mother nature for the community. So did you find out about this while you were on your Peace Corps initiative, or was it afterwards that you found out about Shea?
No, I actually had always known about Shea to a certain degree because it's used in a lot of body care products. So when I was younger, I'd always want to go to the mall with my friends, and we would spend all our time in Bath and Body Works, right? We would spend all of our time. Like, I think that my favorite scent was like Freesia or something, you know, and you just buy up all the creams and you buy up. So I was that girl. I was always wanting to smell things, really excited about lotions. And so I had seen stuff with Shea written all over it,
right? But
I never knew where it came from. I never knew. And, you know, I have a Ghanaian mother, never knew that shea butter came from Africa. And she definitely grew up with it. She grew up around it. It was prior to going to Peace Corps, I was an intern at the American Embassy in Burkina Faso. So that's when I was first exposed to shea butter in its purest form.
Interesting.
And I started learning about women who make it, but it wasn't until I was living in a village that I saw it firsthand, that I even, you know, saw the women going out to harvest the fruit. Sometimes I would go out with them. So that's when it became very real in terms of me really seeing its connection to the lives of women, seeing a disconnect, because I was like, well, I remember buying this when I was little, when I go to the mall. Right. Why is it different here? Why does it look different here? For one, it's not the same product. And then two, if it starts here in these communities, why are these women so poor? Because I know I can buy it for tons of money over here. So I started feeling like there was something I needed to continue digging in to learn a little bit more about why there was this disconnect between what was happening local in these communities and what was translating to global market.
So how'd you get started? Like, was that the light bulb moment? Was kind of over time realizing that there's a bit of a disconnect here, right? You have women or community living in extreme poverty, but it's almost like not a luxury product in America, but it's sort of a, health, organic. I mean, it's not like cheap, right? I mean, it's still, you have to have sort of, money and understand it to go buy it from a store. And there's obviously good margins there, right? For the stores to do it at scale. So what made you actually look deeper into it and then actually want to start a company and a brand? Because that's a pretty big deal.
For me, the driver was these women. I wanted to figure out how I could help them take advantage of a market, like you've just so clearly stated, that existed. And if people were selling it and getting it to customers in the US, then money was being made. And the question was, how can we get these women access to some of that money, access to some of that value? And so initially, I never planned to start a beauty business. I often say I have no business running a beauty business. I had used body care products and beauty products, but I didn't know anything in terms of product development, marketing, branding, ingredient formulation. Like all of that is something that I learned over time. And initially, when I moved back to the US in '05, I started a 501c3 nonprofit because I was really looking at this issue from a capacity building, training.
Right.
Maybe these women needed access to the tools, the knowledge, the systems to create a pure product that was high quality. Maybe that was the problem. They didn't have the infrastructure to create something really great to connect to the market. So my earlier vision was to do that, help organize cooperatives, give access to capital to the women, figure out production equipment they could use to make the processing a lot easier. So it was really on the supply side, really digging in terms of the ecosystem that would need to be created to help them even create something that could be shipped abroad. And so that's what I focused my time on for a pretty long time, for over 7 years, really looking at that supply side. Yeah. And I discovered that, yes, there was this issue around capacity building. Yes, there was this issue around training women so that they could meet higher quality standards and giving them access to the tools and, all of that. And so we congratulated ourselves. The women are making a great shea butter product. Okay, I'm done. Yeah, no. Where are they going to sell it? Where was that piece?
The hard part.
Who are the buyers? Who's going to buy this stuff? And so I'll never forget, I went to a conference in New York. So I'm DC based, I live in DC. And it was the Society for Cosmetic Chemists, their annual conference. And so I was like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to find a bunch of buyers. I'm going to connect them to these cooperatives. It's just going to be great. And I remember going because it's one of those conferences where it's for ingredient suppliers. So it's for people who sell ingredients to the big guys, to the large beauty brands that we're all.
So at this point, it's still a nonprofit and you're going to this to try to sell the ingredient, have them buy it wholesale at scale from your organization.
Yes, that was the plan. That was the mission. I was going to get in there and I walked the floor. I, started, anyone who would listen to me, I would just start telling them about these women and these cooperatives and they're making shea butter. And over and over and over again, people would say, oh, well, there's a quality issue. We don't source directly from women in Africa. We have our suppliers from Asia. We have our suppliers from Europe. We've never done that. And they would list out reasons why. And then I soon started to discover that what the industry was bringing in marketing as shea butter is not the same thing that these women were making. Completely different product. And I'd like to illustrate it as like white sugar versus brown sugar, or white sugar versus molasses, brown rice versus white rice, right? It's similar, but the properties are different. The production techniques are different. It's not the exact same product. The nutritional value to your body's different, right? And so I realized what for decades has been marketed as shea butter is not pure, true shea butter directly from the source. I also noticed that there were so many intermediaries between the women and the market. There had been this supply chain that was created that actually excluded these women.
Interesting.
And so these women were not actually being included in the benefits of the supply chain and value chain. And they were stuck in an informal place, an informal market, where they were selling in very large quantities. That's the raw material, not actually adding value, not creating a product that could give them access to higher pricing, access to, a consumer market. They were essentially, in my opinion, a very big piece in terms of their labor.
The piece that you would need. Yeah.
Yet they were not being compensated for that labor in a way that made sense to me. And so I left that conference a bit disillusioned, a little frustrated, and then realized, what am I doing? This is so much bigger than I even ever thought or expected. I mean, I started Shea Yeleen in my early 20s again with no business background. And so I kind of, took a little bit of time to to regroup, right? I had figured out one piece, but I had not really figured out the entire chain. And so that's where in 2012, 2013, I decided to do a pivot to actually develop body care products. This is where I was like, okay, we actually not only need to help women make the shea, that's one step, but we now need to create a product that we could connect directly to a consumer. And then that consumer, we want that consumer to care about the differences in terms of this is a pure product, this is better for them, communicate that difference to them in a way that makes sense. And then also target a customer that also cares about where the product is coming from, caring about the woman who's behind the product, who's making the product. And so that essentially is summed up very quickly in how a product is made is valuable to the customer, because how a product is made influences the benefits, influences the quality to the customer, and it also influences the impact on the lives of the people who make it. And so I started figuring that out, developing out that concept, came up with Transform Your Skin, Transform a Community. That was the tagline. And so, yeah, I became a beauty entrepreneur.
How long was it after that when you left that sort of conference that you made the decision to go a separate route, right? Make it sort of a brand and a business?
Yeah, it was probably about 2 to 3 years.
Wow. Okay.
Really trying to figure it out. Yeah, it wasn't an immediate thing because I had to figure out packaging. I had to figure out shipping. I had to figure out formulation. There was a lot of different things that I had to figure out. So it took a couple of years to figure out what that was going to look like. And then
you didn't just walk back there and be like, hey ladies, we're just going to start a beauty brand. And like, everybody's just going to look at you a little strange. Like, what are you talking about?
Right. Well, I had always said we're going to figure out how to get these products somewhere. But now the somewhere was a little different. It was like, okay, now we're going to make products. And so part of it was helping women make soap, actually taking the shea butter and making a soap out of it. But then there are certain limitations in terms of packaging. So the packaging actually happens in the US, and the formulation of our creams and the small batch manufacturing of our creams, all of that happens here because it's hard to find jars, caps, the components that you need. Can't source that from the communities that we work in. And so it's a system of where the women do as much as they can, add as much value as they can, giving the infrastructure, the local resources, and then we do the finishing. And so we utilize the resources, the packaging, everything that we can here in the US to finish it so that it can meet standards and so that it's competitive with other, brands that, are targeting similar customers to us.
Where is it? Like, how many women are we like talking about here? And like, where is it? Is it a rural village still in sub-Saharan Africa? Okay.
No, great question. So we actually now work with 14 different communities in northern Ghana.
Wow.
And there are approximately 800 women across those communities that are structured into a cooperative that we work with. So we actually have Shea Yeleen Ghana set up. So it's a separate entity from our US operations. And that is managed leadership as cooperative members and local team members. And we do everything from seed to shelf. So the helping women with the harvesting, with the processing, setting up the facilities, so that they can make the shea butter, getting it from the northern part of the country, transporting it all the way to the southern part where the port is, getting it on air, sea freight, shipping it to an East Coast port, clearing it from customs, getting it packaged, and then getting it to our customers. So I'm just trying to illustrate what that chain looks like.
Absolutely.
For us.
And it's funny because as you're talking, the nonprofit was almost like your accelerator into starting the business, right? It's such a weird route to take, right? Because usually, like, nonprofit's not a stepping stone to start a company or a brand, but like, I think it's actually a great way to do it now that you kind of laid it out, because you learn all development stuff, right? Like working with getting the organizational structure down and kind of doing the dirty work, so to speak, and like the hard, boring stuff, getting that sort of figured out in the nonprofit side. But then once you have that sort of completed, then you kind of have a real good head start on like building a brand.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I would also add too, it really created the foundation of my business model because from the beginning, women have been centered. I think it would
Yeah.
have been different if I was like, oh, I'm going to create shea butter products, because then the product would have been centered. But this idea of like, how can we really help build that ecosystem and infrastructure, really centering the role of women, created, if I wasn't looking at it from that perspective, I think the business model would be very different today. And I also think too, for me, the when every day, so my email screen, the background image is of the women, because I have to remind myself, especially during the challenging times where it's like, why am I doing this business? Like there's like one thing after another. At one point, we had goods stuck. They weren't releasing our goods, and so they were just on a ship sitting there stuck,
Right.
And I'm like pulling my hair out trying to figure out how to get it cleared from customs. Those days I have to remind myself, why am I doing this? And for me, our business model increases women's income by 5 times the country's minimum wage.
Wow.
And that is financial independence. That is helping women do things like access health services, sending their children to school. That's actually the number one reason, the number one use for increased income is getting their kids in better schools, or even just getting them into school, investing in other income generating activities. And that's the driver for me. That is what gets me up. That is why I do this. And we've actually had 2 groups of women come to the US.
Oh, wow.
On separate occasions to walk into a store and see the
that's cool.
So they can connect. They can see, okay, when we're in our community, this is what we make. Look at what happens when it comes all the way over here and gets on a store shelf. Whole Foods, we did a tour of 26 locations in the North Atlantic region, and being able to meet customers, being able to meet buyers, being able to meet other stakeholders. And I think for me, that's really important, because oftentimes these local community members don't get that opportunity to see the other side of an industry that they're so critically involved in, that their labor is involved in. So whether you're looking at, for example, like a coffee supply chain, it's the same thing. You have these coffee farmers, who don't, or even chocolate, who've never had chocolate, yet their labor is part of these like huge multi-billion-dollar industries. And I think we need to switch it around. We need them to be able to see why so many people are coming into their communities and extracting these resources. And for me, that's very transformative, because when they go back into their communities, they can share that experience. They can show the pictures. And it's a lot easier for their community members to relate to them than it is me, because I'm still a foreigner. I'm still, I look like them, but I'm still different, right? And I think being able to have someone that, you're working with, someone that you even grew up with, and hear it from them, that's a transformation. And that's really the core of what I'm trying to do with Shea Yeleen, is change the way we make products, change the way those products come to market, and throughout that entire process, ensure that people's lives are being impacted in a positive way financially.
Is that something you can replicate, like every year or a couple of years, you take a couple women to like some of these stores? I think it's such a cool, it's just such a great perspective for them to look at. And I think also like vice versa. The other thing I wanted to ask was that what are the effects of when a consumer purchases it? Because I think we can buy something off the shelf, go home, read a back of the label, go to a website and look and be like, man, this is really cool. But like actually hearing it from the mouth on the ground of like how this affects a community, right? Like 5 times a minimum wage is a really big deal anywhere in the world, but it could go a lot further in smaller communities. So like, what have you seen that you can tell consumers, like if you buy this, like this is what happens, like kids end up going to school, right? Like healthcare is provided, women have stable income, families have stable income, right? Like the effects of our consumer dollar is pretty incredible.
No, you're spot on. I have people who will email us who met the women back in 2014 and say, oh, I remember meeting Gladys, and I remember, and when we did our rebrand, for example, people, a couple of people shot me notes and they're like, oh, this is so beautiful. I remember when I met them at the National Mall. And so it is transformative for our customer as well. And I think because of my Peace Corps experience, because of growing up in an international family and being very exposed to different cultures, different ideas, very early on, it's built into this business model, right? It's all about relationships, connections, being able to put people who may not have ever had the opportunity to meet each other because of distance, culture, etc. You're all across the Atlantic Ocean, but bringing all of that together so that we realize, and I feel like with COVID-19, it's really shown us we're all connected. What happens in one area can impact and influence someone who's thousands of miles away. And it's the same thing from our customers. What you buy right now in, your local grocery store or your favorite gift shop truly can impact someone who is thousands of miles away. And so really creating that connection, because it has to be a connection. Yes, we're creating products that are great for our customers, that is filling a need, filling an issue that they're having, dry skin, eczema, all of those things, right? We all want to look great and beautiful. But if you choose our brand versus another brand who may not have that built into their model, you're actually choosing to transform someone else's life. It is being able to hear it not just from me, but also hearing it from the women who are behind the brand. And we've done trips where people have traveled with me to visit the cooperatives.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So if you want to, leave Amsterdam, bring your family. We'll go to Ghana. You can, you can come to
I'm
the
gonna hold you to that.
No, I'm being dead serious. And that also is transformative. And totally. I think that at the end of the day, it's really widening everyone's perspective and seeing how we all have this incredible ability and also responsibility to make choices that help other people. And it changes kind of the aid mentality that really hasn't helped Sub-Saharan Africa.
Totally. It's such a great point. No, it's a great point.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to talk about was you started with soap. You had mentioned soap is kind of the first product off the shelf, so to speak. It's always kind of tough to look at and to do other things, right? Because it can be a little nerve-wracking to say, hey, shea butter is so multidimensional, right? We can do other things with it, but will the market sort of accept it? You're going out on a limb with using more supplies and kind of taking a little bit of a risk. So what are some of the other, products after soap that came and what were some of those decisions like to actually release now sort of a plethora of products?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So what the women make is shea butter, which is an oil that solidifies at room temperature. So it's very thick, very, very moisturizing. It leaves a nice kind of like sheen to your skin. And so when they finish their production, that's what the results. You can take that oil, which, essentially a vegetable oil, plant-based oil, and make anything you can think of. I see you have a lovely beard. You can use it as a beard moisturizer. You can use it as a hair conditioner. There's so many different things that you can do just with this one product. And initially we had soap and balms because they're very, fairly easy to make. Most of the things that we make, if you have a kitchen, you can make it in the kitchen like you're baking or cooking. Indie beauty recipes are fairly easy. You'll test it and tweak things here and there. So initially, that's all. I wasn't really, I wasn't building a beauty brand. I was just, trying to help these women get their products to market. And it was actually based a lot on consumer feedback. Some people would say, oh, this feels good, but it's a little thick for me. Do you have a cream? Do you have something that's lighter? And I was like, I never thought about making a cream, but maybe we should. So many people keep asking for it. And so that's where that evolution came. People were actually asking for other products. And then in 2017, we landed a deal with MGM Resorts. And through their spa, they were really interested in creating spa products. And so another request, and I worked with the spa director and we created sugar scrubs and we created products that they could use for manicures and pedicures and relaxing massages. And that was it was very eye-opening for me because actually working with someone who's in the industry and who could tell me who could tell me, oh yeah, this smells good. I have my own thoughts and my own viewpoints, but to work with someone who has, 20 years of experience, it was amazing. And so that's when we created things that could be used in body treatments. So exfoliating your skin, prepping your skin. And so those are some of the examples of how we formulated and evolved over time, and working with chemists to really make sure that our formulas are right. And we also do testing. So any product before it hits the shelf has to go through a testing phase.
And you had mentioned Whole Foods and now MGM. What was it like to get that call, right, or go through that process? Because obviously Whole Food, getting in there is a big deal, but it's also process, right? It's very difficult and very hard. So what was that process like, and was it sort of stressful, and do you get like an email?
Oh no, or something? Grant, no stress at all. What are you talking about?
Does Whole Food just like email you and say, hey, you're in?
I wish. No, that never happens. I mean, at least it did not happen for me. No, Whole Foods was very interesting. I was actually rejected several times. And I walked into a Whole Foods and said, hey, do you want to bring our products into your store? And the answer was like, no. And the reason was the packaging was awful. Like when I initially, I share the stories sometimes when I initially walked in with my first bar of soap, I had packaged it with construction paper and Scotch tape. So I'll just let your imagination run wild with that one.
Yeah, that's a tough first impression, I would imagine. But but I also think it's a great point of why branding and packaging is so important. No matter if you're a social enterprise or just a trendy brand or something like that, that's such an important thing to have as an emerging brand.
Absolutely.
So talk about that when they said no, right? And did you go and now have to go look at a package designer and go get this part done? Because you're like learning every single step of the way. Like, this is awesome.
Yes, literally learning. Google was my friend. I Googled everything. I built my business on Google, everything. I literally be like, okay, what is the best label material? Because one of the things is that because our product is oily, if you use the wrong label material, the oil will actually degrade the label, right? So like your hands, your fingers, everything. Right. And so you have to have special coating. And so, all of that stuff that I didn't know. And then I would just have to like figure out along the way, or I would try something and then I would see, oh, this actually is, for example, you can't put a cream in certain packaging components because it might react poorly with the component, because our creams, they're formulation of oil and water. Preservative systems, making sure that we weren't using any preservative systems that were toxic or could potentially be toxic to our customers. So what are natural preservative systems that work? So all of that, and I did work with a chemist, but I also had to research myself as well, just so I could understand. And if a customer had a question, I could explain it to the customer. But packaging is huge. Yeah. And I would say packaging is probably my weakest area for me as a person. I can barely draw stick figures. And so I know when something looks beautiful, I'm like, oh, that's pretty, but I don't know how it gets pretty. And so we're really trying to figure out and working with the right designer who can, and our challenge was creating something that would resonate in terms of pop off the shelf, catch the customer's eye, but also that could communicate our differentiation and our community impact. Yeah. And so there was always a tension in terms of trying to balance that out.
It's very difficult to do. When you went back to them, right? Did you set up like another meeting and say, hey, I have an actual packaged box now of product. Would you like to meet again?
Yeah. And so I did do that. I went to someone else, and it wasn't like a rejection, but it just went, a lot of times when you pitch, people don't really ever say no. I know, you know what I mean? But their silence is enough. As their silence confirms. And so it was one of these things where I got lucky, actually, where a senior vice president in the North Atlantic region was launching this program to support social entrepreneurs, conscious capitalists under the age of 35 to help with getting their products on shelf. And so I learned about that program. It was called Youth Trade. And I applied to that program. And then they put me in front of the right buyers. And then they were like, okay, we'll bring you in. And the buyer that brought us into the North Atlantic region, she and I are still very close, just an amazing, incredible person. And that's how it started. And then when you get into one door, now you're in 7, and then 26, and now you're in another region. And
so how many are you in now?
So we're in 3 regions across the Northeast. So the Northeast, North Atlantic, and Mid-Atlantic.
And how many stores is that? Like what cities are we
roughly? So like the Boston area, New York, DC, but then like states like Rhode Island, New Hampshire. So the Northeast, I guess. The corridor kind of.
Okay.
Across Whole Foods and Natural Independent stores is roughly 120 locations.
Wow, that's a lot.
Well, it is, but it isn't when you think about the fact that I think they have like 300 locations, 355. But then when you look at like a Target, they have like over 1,000. So we're still kind of, small when you compare it to those numbers.
Of course, but you got to start somewhere, right?
Exactly. But actually, before COVID-19, we also had our contract with MGM.
Right.
And we had an amazing retail location at Washington National Airport, which was
that's great.
Phenomenal. It was incredible, but COVID-19 shot all of those down for the near term, just because the travel industry was impacted, entertainment was impacted, so MGM was also impacted. So 2020 was very challenging, and the pivot that I'm working on now is really building out a digital e-commerce strategy.
Yep.
And we launched with Macy's in February, and so we have that business online. We'll be rolling out in stores with them. But I think for protecting kind of against pandemics, we'll have to build out a very clear digital strategy.
But will some of this, the MGM partnerships and like the airport, would that come back this year or next year, you think?
Possibly. I'm not sure, honestly. I say yes, but I also think that strategically, I'm changing my business model. I'm changing how my customer gets my products. And so it just depends on how that rollout goes. Ideally, I would want to have 60 to 70% of my business go through digital, and then be really like intentionally around what are some of the retail strategies that make sense to support a business model that's primarily online.
Because with the MGM, and you don't have to divulge if you don't want to, but was it MGM branded?
No, it was
Shea Yeleen. Okay.
Shea Yeleen.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah. It was Shea Yeleen.
I would like to sort of, end a little bit on the future and some successes that you would, and goals that you might have as a company and a brand over the next 3 to 5 years. And so you said building out e-commerce infrastructure, obviously, a huge part of brand strategy nowadays. And so what are some of the goals that you hope to reach?
Well, on the supply side, one of our goals is to expand to additional countries and looking at other ingredients. And so all African-based, plant-based ingredients, so like moringa, baobab, marula, neem. There's so many incredible ingredients for health and wellness. And so I want to expand. I'm looking at South Sudan, Uganda, Cameroon, Senegal. And so in June, I'll actually be doing some site visits. I'll be going to Ghana, and I'll also be going to Cameroon, just to kind of explore what are some of other communities that we can work with. So on the supply side, really building that out, more ingredients, more communities. And then on the market side, really doubling down on digital and online and really figuring that out. And so right now I'm part of the NASDAQ Milestone Makers Program, which is through their Entrepreneurial Center. And so I'm working to figure out what a digital go-to market strategy would look like. And that support has been incredible. In addition to support from JP Morgan Chase, they are doing a program where they support entrepreneurs on an issue that's challenging them. And so building out like a financial model that moves our strategies to digital, and really looking at what are some of the assumptions that we need to be looking at. How would we build out that funnel? Like some of the questions that I really don't know, but I can tap into resources that can help me figure that out. And so it's really, it's how can we communicate our product value, our social impact value in a way that connects to the right customer? And how can we do that from a digital perspective? So what does influencer marketing look like? You know, what does the UX and UI design look like on our site? How do we build out the funnel? Like, again,
big
all
deal.
of those questions.
These are big things.
Yes. So that's going to take some time. And in terms of like, what does that look like over the next 3 years or so? I mean, my goal is to get anyone with skin to use our products. So that's a lot of people.
The market is quite large. Yes.
Exactly. And so getting our products in front of more people and really making sure that when anyone thinks about shea butter, they're thinking about how it's impacting a woman in Africa.
Amazing story. Thank you so much for taking the time and talking. I think it's I love the journey of going from, you know, Peace Corps to, of course, Peace Corps, that you got to start a nonprofit, right? It's like the thing you do after it. But then also even graduating even further, right? And really starting a company and a brand. Because to me, I just think that is the sustainable approach, right? And the model that gets people out of extreme poverty, you know, and creates long lasting, you know, change in communities. So I really just love the idea of building companies and brands rather than nonprofit organizations, because I just think it's long term. It's just a better avenue for growth. Not only that, but, you know, economic growth and just a community being uplifted. So great work so far, and best of luck the rest of this year and the next decades to come.
No, thank